Good evening, everyone. We're going to wait maybe 30 to 40 more seconds before we actually start the course. Well, I feel like we're in a quorum, so we can go ahead and get started. Y'all see what I did there? Okay, well, all right, I'm just gonna keep going. Good evening, everyone. My name is Samantha Terry. I am actually the program manager for the NPU division in the Department of City Planning. We are here tonight as we are hosting our class for our Neighborhood Planning Unit University, NPUU, CL 1003.004, Parliamentary Procedures for the role of a chairperson or presiding officer. I'm glad to have you all here. A lot of you all have probably taken a lot of our courses already, and we appreciate you returning and joining us on this Thursday night. We have a couple of classroom rules that we want to go through really quickly, just so that we can get started and get into this wonderful wealth of information that Mr. Dennis is going to share with us. We ask that everyone please keep your mics muted throughout the course. A lot of times we receive a lot of background noises, and we don't want to distract the other learners in the process. Right now, if you would like to, if you have not already, grab a pen and paper just so you can keep notes, and feel free to grab a snack as well, because our parliamentary procedure course is one of the longer ones, but with good reason. Also, at the end of the class, if you'd like to make a comment or a question, more so question, we like to focus on what we're actually talking about. A lot of times I know that we bring up things that are happening in our own communities, but we can refer you to Mr. Dennis so that you can actually ask those questions directly. But if you'd like to ask a question or raise your hand in the queue, and we will acknowledge you and ask questions that way. And we ask that you keep all questions brief and relevant to course content. So if you're not familiar or you have not taken our courses before, the way that you can actually, if you want to respond, if you think he's saying something really awesome, or you just want to celebrate him because Mr. Dennis is awesome, at the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions button. You press the button at the bottom, click reactions, and then a pop-up will come up and it says raise hand. And that's how we can put you in the queue to ask your questions. But you can also do a thumbs up or a hands clap or whatever. Just whatever your heart feels tonight. So our instructor is Mr. Dennis Conway. He's a professional registered parliamentarian at Conway Parliamentary Services. He also serves as our parliamentarian with our actual Atlanta City Council. So without further ado, I will actually turn it over to Mr. Conway. Mr. Dennis, are you ready?
Wait a minute. You're on mute, Mr. Conway.
You're making rookie moves, Mr. Conway.
There we go. There we go.
Oh, also, everyone in the chat, the worksheet that we will be working from is literally in the chat. So you can pull it up if you did not receive it in your email. It was attached in the email that went out to everyone, but also it's in the chat just in the event you forgot it. So if you would like to pull that up right now, take that opportunity. Mr. Conway, it's yours.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Terry. And I have to admit, I turned a little bit red when she was so gracious and called me awesome. I tell you what, Ms. Terry is awesome. She's been just a blast to work with, and very professional and very helpful. And y'all have a good team here for the NPUs. You really do. And they're just great to work with. They know their stuff, and I'm glad for them. I thank you for the privilege of being able to provide some help and some training in parliamentary procedure tonight. As Ms. Terry pointed out, we're going to talk about the role of the chair. And if it's okay with everyone, we'll talk about the role of the chair and other leaders in the group as well in a meeting. In other words, I have in mind to talk about the role of the parliamentarian, the role of the secretary, et cetera. They all play a very vital role in running a meeting and making sure that the meeting goes orderly and that good things happen. So it'll be just a little bit broader than the chair, but we will do a lot of work and focus on the work of the chairperson. So what I want to do first off is I want to read a definition of what we're talking about with an NPU or with any other deliberative body. This is right out of Robert's Rules of Order. And by the way, the references that I'm using are out of Robert's Rules of Order 12th edition. It's the newly revised edition. And this is the 12th version now. And this quote comes from section 1, paragraph 1, section 1, paragraph 1. We're talking about a deliberative body. Here's the definition. It is a group of people having or assuming freedom to act in concert, meeting to determine in full and free discussion. That's important. We're going to talk about a number of these points. In free discussion, courses of action to be taken in the name of the entire group. And that's from Robert's Rules of Order. And that's our workbook. And one of the things that I've observed over the years, and if you've taken this class before, you're going to hear some review, but that's okay because the principles of parliamentary law and procedure, I review on a regular basis as a professional. It's one of those things, it's one of those subjects where you can't just read it and say, okay, I got it. Now let's go on. You need to practice it. You need to review. You need to study it. You need to review. So don't let all that scare you. Learn the basics and review the basics. You don't have to become as learned in the area as I do, because there's so much more than what an MPU would deal with that I'm involved in. So I don't want to scare you off right off the bat, but parliamentary procedure is a very, very important set of guidelines and rules to keep an orderly business meeting when it comes to people in the room trying to make decisions. So in that quote, we have this statement: a group of people who act in concert. You're deciding something as a group, and that's important to recognize. One of the things that one of the illustrations I use a lot, and so if you've heard this before at least a dozen times, go ahead and grab your favorite Mark magazine article real quick and read that, and I'll be done with the illustration in just a moment. But what I use a lot, I liken parliamentary procedure to traffic rules and traffic laws. It doesn't matter how kind and smart people in the room are. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody has a strong opinion, and those opinions differ. It's supposed to be that way. It's good to have a strong opinion. It's good to have everything thought out, and you know what you want, you know how things ought to be. If nobody had any opinions and nobody had strong opinions, then your organization wouldn't go anywhere. So don't be surprised when somebody on the floor is passionate about their thoughts. They need to stay respectful and they need to remain kind, but it's proper to have a strong opinion. So when you're in a meeting, like I said, I like to compare the guidelines and rules for organizing discussion to traffic laws. If you got up in the morning and there weren't any traffic laws and the news said, just go ahead and be nice, just make sure that you're nice to people on the road, you just drive your way to work and don't get upset at anybody, that wouldn't last very long. So the same way in a business meeting, you can have the kindest people, the smartest people all in the room. And if you don't have some sort of guidelines and some sort of structure to your discussion when you're making proposals, when you're discussing those proposals, when you're deciding on those proposals, if you don't have some sort of structure, no matter how nice you are, people are going to get upset at each other. And that's what we want to avoid. Now, we are going to talk about leadership tonight, but I want to lay the groundwork to help you understand what we're dealing with when we're talking about the role of the leaders. Okay, so this is introductory.
Mr. Conway, can I stop you for 1 second?
Yes.
I just realized our new commissioner, Commissioner Prince, is on. Commissioner Prince, do you have anything you would like to say to the class before we continue?
First thing I'd like to say is I don't have my camera, so I'm going to be a little incognito, but I was really excited to see that this class was scheduled, and I hope that you all will get a lot out of it. I'm here because I need some reminders myself. Happy to see so much participation. Please proceed.
Okay, Mr. Conway, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Prince. Thank you for the comments and thank you for attending. So what we'll do is, and as Ms. Terry has already pointed out, if you do have a question, go ahead and raise your hand or put it in the chat. I'll pause on occasion and we'll go ahead and give room for questions. And Ms. Terry, if you see a question that comes up that you think it'd be good to just stop and address it now, feel free to chime in and just say, Mr. Conway, can we speak to this now? So perfect, good. So keep in mind, it's not a matter of just being nice. People can really work hard to be nice, and that's good, and we all should. I'm a firm believer in that. But don't be surprised if you don't have any structure in the meeting, if people start getting irritated at each other and people start testing relationships and having problems. Have some guidelines. Have some structure in your discussions and decision-making process. And that's exactly what Robert's Rules of Order provides. It provides that structure, okay? So another part of the quote, it says, who meet to determine courses of action. And what an NPU does, as I understand it, I've been to 3 meetings and I've worked with Ms. LaRue and Ms. Terry and others in the leadership, and they've helped me understand some of the ins and outs of the work. But essentially, as I understand it, the NPUs, they make recommendations to the Atlanta city government. And so you're posed with a question, you're posed with a request by somebody in the community, a business in the community perhaps, or somebody that wants to get some zoning changed or qualify for something along those lines. And so what you'll do is you'll meet, you'll discuss it, and you'll vote, and you'll send that recommendation one way or another to the city government. You play an important role. As a matter of fact, when I first was introduced to the idea of the NPUs, I'd never seen anything like that before. I actually grew up in Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon is a beautiful place. It's a nice city. And I think they would benefit from something like this. I think every major city would. Having groups of citizens being able to meet together and to discuss recommendations to the government of the city that pertain directly to their experience at home. I think that's a wonderful design. And so I know there's some discussions about how to move forward. There always should be discussions about how to move forward. That's just part of structure. Sometimes they're in flux. So that's the work as an NPU. You're coming together, you're making recommendations, you're discussing those recommendations, and then you vote on it. And whatever the decision is, you'll send it up. And that way the government knows what your ideas are and how you feel about certain things. Full and free discussion. That's another part of the quote. Every opinion matters. And I say this a lot. I can't stress this enough. When somebody stands up and says something that you strongly disagree with, let them disagree with you. Let them say something that you don't like. Understand that just because they say something that you disagree with and you think is a bad idea, it doesn't mean that's how the vote is going to go. Always keep that in mind. Because what happens is, and we're human, we hear an opinion that we think is just not a good idea, and boy, not in my neighborhood. And I get that, and that's understandable. But keep in mind as well that your organization is providing your thoughts to the city government. Ultimately, the city government will make the decision on how to move forward. Your opinions, your recommendations are weighty. They weight them seriously. But understand, on the level that we're talking about in any meeting, when somebody stands up and makes a motion, when somebody stands up and gives an opinion, that doesn't mean that's going to win the day. So everybody's opinion must matter. And if you can honor everybody else's opinion and everybody else's motion, then they will honor yours. And I think everything I say is pure gold when I'm in a meeting. I stand up and I think, man, just everybody's just going to, their jaw's going to drop open when I get done with what I have to say, and I'm most always disappointed. And then I get people disagreeing with me. And that's just how it goes. So let people share their ideas, let people share their proposals, and be patient, kind, and respectful. Everybody in the room has equal authority. That's very important to remember. The person that gives the idea that you disagree with, they have just as much authority as you do to give that idea. And then it says they determine action for the entire group. So be involved, say your piece, respectful. If everybody would share their ideas, no matter how silly it may sound to you, no matter how off the wall it may sound to you, when you listen to all the ideas, you never know what may come up. I mean, it may be just an amazing thought, an amazing perspective that nobody ever thought of before. So let everybody speak, be involved, do your thing. And the more people that can speak, the more people that can share their ideas, whether you like them or not, the more informed your group will be. Information is good. Information is important, even information you disagree with. So like I said, what we're doing is we're laying the foundation for how the leadership would work. You must keep these things in mind. The individuals in that room must be allowed to speak. They must be treated with respect and must be treated fairly. No matter their ideas, no matter their motive. Did somebody have a question, or did somebody just not mute?
I had to mute someone. Go ahead, Mr. Dennis. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's a unique world when we're doing everything virtually, isn't it? So leadership. Let's talk a little bit about leadership. Now, what I've done is I've copied and installed these points and these quotes right out of Robert's Rules of Order. That's what I've done. We're not going to talk about all of them because some of them are self-explanatory and some of them just don't need that much comment. However, if you see a point on here, point number 1, 2, I'm going to talk about 3, 4, or 5, or any of these areas that you think you would like to talk about a little bit, feel free to mention it.
In Atlanta, I don't even making money in them condos and stuff like that, and them houses that's.
I'm sorry, could you all make sure your mics are muted?
So recognize now we're going to talk about the work of the chairperson. The work of the chairperson is to recognize members who are entitled to the floor. The chair must preside over all discussion. I've watched organizations, and I even observed this in a couple of, at least one NPU that I attended. The chair would open the meeting, the chairperson would open the meeting, and then after that, committees would give reports, and then the committee chair ran the meeting for their segment. That's not a good idea. The chairperson, there has to be one person that has delegated the responsibility to monitor and to oversee all discussion and all procedure, and that's the chairperson. When you allow other people to run the meeting, then you have different chair people essentially, and the chairperson has really almost relegated their position. So it is important that the whole meeting is ran by the chairperson and no one else. That's not to say that if I'm chairing the meeting, it's not to say I'm the smartest person in the room. If I'm chairing the meeting, that doesn't mean that I'm the best person in the room. But if I've been given the job to chair the meeting, I must do the full job. Otherwise, things get confusing and things can quickly get out of control if one person isn't moderating. So keep that in mind and try to arrange your meetings so that everyone is working through your leadership. Something else I want to point out too, we're talking about Robert's Rules of Order. We're talking about the chairperson in the meeting. Let me recommend this for every chairperson and parliamentarian and secretary as well. Sometimes, and I was at one or two meetings where it seemed like it was just pretty much routine. There was no tension. There was no, people getting upset, and there was nothing controversial. It wasn't difficult. It wasn't complex. And sometimes that's how meetings go, and that's good. I mean, that doesn't mean things aren't getting done. It just means that's normal. Let me recommend this: when things are low key, when things are smooth, and there's nothing controversial, I highly recommend, and I recommend this to all the organizations, I highly recommend that you practice parliamentary procedure even in those settings. Even when you don't think you need it, practice it, utilize it, implement it in those settings. If you will, and you get good at it as a group, as an NPU, and you get good at it, as you're used to it, you understand what it means, you need a second, you understand what it means taking turns speaking without interrupting, you understand what it means to send something back to committee, even though it's just, is everybody okay if we would just send this back to committee? Okay, we'll just do it. Go ahead and have somebody make a motion, second, and vote on it. Practice the procedure. And the reason I recommend it is because if your group is good at practicing procedure when things are smooth, then when things get difficult and you're used to procedure, that's where procedure really becomes important. So chair people, make sure, or I would highly recommend that you lead your NPU in the habit of practicing proper procedure, even during the slow times, even during the mundane times. And it's going to seem tedious. It's going to seem like you're just dotting I's and crossing T's just for the sake of dotting I's and crossing T's. We know it's a T. We can tell what better means. You didn't cross the T's. Okay, fine. We got it. We know it's it. You didn't dot your I. We know the word is it. And so it can feel like that when everything is going smooth and you're still implementing procedure. I have seen it so many times, and I say this a lot. I've got quite a few years under my belt helping organizations with this. And when I first come in and I promote this approach and they implement it, it is amazing to watch how smoothly things go when things get controversial. I mean, it's just fun to see. That's one of the reasons I'm sold on parliamentary procedure, because I watch groups, in my history, I've watched groups really struggle and friendships strained and folks leaving meetings, instead of feeling like the meeting was productive, they're just upset at each other. And there's no call for that. There's no, you're coming together as neighbors and you're coming together as friends, and you want to be able to conduct business together. And that's by being organized, you can. So let me recommend to the chair people, go ahead and implement these principles and these ideas, these guidelines all the time. Before we continue, Ms. Terry, does anybody have any questions?
So far, so good. And I don't see any hands raised. So I think you can actually keep going.
Okay, sounds good. Number 6 on page 2. The responsibility of the chair is to enforce the rules relating to debate and those relating to order and decorum within the assembly. The chair has been delegated this authority. And let me repeat that. The chairperson has been delegated this authority. I'll ask a question, and I ask this question every time I do a training session. And you can answer it if you've had my classes before, you know the answer. Answer it in your own mind. In your judgment, who has the final authority in the room in a business meeting? So just think that through. If you're new in the class, in these classes, then take a minute. If you've heard this before, then you know the answer, and if you can remember the answer, then that's excellent. Then that means that that you're in a good place. So I'll ask it again. In a business meeting, who has the final authority in the room? Is it the chair? Is it the parliamentarian? Is it the attorney? Is it the security guard at the door? Who is it? The answer is this. It's the majority vote of the membership in the room. That's who has the final authority in the room. And I'll repeat it. The final authority in the room belongs to the majority vote of the membership in the room. It's not the chair, it's not the parliamentarian, and it's not even the security guard at the door. I did this class for another organization, and I asked that same question. I posed the question, and I used the position of police officer. I said there's the parliamentarian, there's the chairperson, there's an attorney, there's a police officer. I said, who has final authority? And somebody spoke up and said, the man with the gun. He has final authority. So I thought it was clever. I thought it was a quick answer. I thought it was funny. But even the security guard at the door doesn't have final authority. It is the majority vote of the people in the room. So keep that in mind as you're chairing a meeting, and keep that in mind as you're attending the meeting. Don't think you're running the show as chair. Don't think it all belongs to you. It doesn't. It belongs to the group. The organization belongs to the group. The organization belongs, and the decision-making belongs to the majority of the members in the room. So while you're implementing procedure, keep that in mind. While you are guiding the meeting, keep that in mind. Your authority is delegated. It is delegated essentially by the majority of the membership in the meeting. So what comes into play sometimes is that you have in the room, you have people who have served as chair, you have officials in the room, you might even have a council member in the room. You're going to have people in the room that you're tempted to give deference to, and there's some of that that's understandable. There's some of that that comes into play in a nuanced way. But I think every council member. So I attend one council meeting, not council meeting, but one NPU meeting that I attended. Ms. President Moore was in the meeting, and she and I talked for a minute. She was in her NPU meeting. And so I've heard council members talk about going to their NPU meetings. And I have to suppose, as I've gotten to know the council members, as I work with them, I have to suppose even a council member would appreciate it if you're chairing the meeting and they get excited, they feel like they want to speak up, and they raise their hand, they just start talking over somebody. If you as a chairperson, I'm just using this as an example, if you as a chairperson would respectfully say, excuse me, Mr. Councilman, Miss Councilwoman, I'll recognize you right after the gentleman or the lady is done speaking. Thank you so much. Be respectful, be kind, be gracious as you enforce the procedures, as you enforce the rules, but don't be afraid to, no matter who it's applying to. It might be your brother or sister, or your mom or your dad that's out in the room. Be kind, be respectful, but I am confident that most folks would respect you if you're fair and you're equitable as you deliver, as you lead the meeting, as you enforce Robert's Rules of Order.
Mr. Clay, I have a question in the chat.
Yes.
So is it the majority of the people who actually vote, or does it need to be the majority of those who present? Many people never vote. Thank you, Ms. Brooks.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a good question. Under normal rules, because some organizations change the rules to require the majority of people in the room. If there's going to be a vote, it has to be at least 1/2 of the people in the room. but that's not how it works under the normal rules. So let me put it this way. You could have 100 people in the room. You could have 50 people vote, and 26 people vote yes, the motion passes. So what that means is that 26 people out of 100 just made the decision for the room, for the organization. So I'll go over that again. And that's an excellent question. The way it's worded is those present and voting. It's a majority of those present and voting. It allows, the normal rules allow for people to abstain. You should never be, I shouldn't put it that way, but under normal rules, the right to abstain is granted. Excuse me. So let me go over those numbers again, just to help you understand. If you had 100 people in the room and only 50 people voted, you had 50 people say, I don't even want to vote on this. Okay, so you've got 100 people in the room, 50 people vote. Out of those 50, 26 people say yes, the motion passes. So abstentions mean something, but nonetheless, that's how the numbers are tallied. Did that help?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Where are we here? So yeah, don't be afraid to implement the rules. Don't play favoritism. Be respectful. Be kind. And I can't stress that enough. While you're serving as a chair, be nice. You know, there's no benefit. That's not productive to feel like you have to be like a drill sergeant to people. And I'm not saying that. I never saw that at an MPU. I didn't see that happen, but I have watched it happen in organizations. There was a meeting I was in. It was a small group of people in the meeting, and this person was filling in for the chairperson. And I really thought I was in boot camp. The poor guy, he felt like it was his job to just really lay into people and push to get his way. That's not what a chairperson does. A chairperson is a leader and a guide. So be nice, be kind, be respectful. Number 7, your job is to expedite business in every way compatible with the rights of members. So you're moving forward. People have schedules. People have their shows they want to get home and watch. People have the families they want to get home and spend time with. And so if things are unorganized and you're scrambled and you're not efficient by using proper procedure, and by the way, I keep going back to this, but understanding procedure, implementing procedure will help things move along properly, efficiently, and fairly. So go ahead and be efficient and don't apologize for it. Let me interject this along with this point. The chair does not have the authority to end debate. Okay? So let me repeat that. The chairperson does not have the authority to end debate. I've been in meetings where folks are talking and they have a lot to talk about. A lot of people have opinions and they will, and discussion seems to be going on for a while. And even, when it's gone on so long that folks are just repeating themselves. You keep hearing the same thing said over and over again. That's understandable. So what'll happen is the chairperson will say, okay, we've said enough on that. One more person or 2 more people, and then we're done. The chairperson doesn't, unless the governing document is provided, the chairperson does not have that authority. Debate is done when everybody is done talking, or when somebody makes a motion to move the previous question or to call a question, it's often stated. And so let me describe that motion for you. They can't just sit in the audience and go, I call the question, and that means debate is done. That's not how it works. So you're the chairperson, and people are talking, and even you feel like it's, we've talked this thing to death. When are we going to be done? You just keep calling on people as long as they haven't talked past their limits. And I'll tell you what those limits are in just a moment. But until somebody makes a motion to call the question, that's a second. It requires a second. It's not debatable. It's not amendable. And it requires 2/3 vote. So you're talking about something that the MPU needs to decide on, and the thing just keeps, everybody just has an opinion, and everything keeps going on. And then somebody says, I call the question. Let me back up. Somebody stands, or however they get the chair's recognition. You call on that person, they say, I call the question. That doesn't end debate. Then you would ask for a second. Is there a second? Okay, somebody seconds it. Then there's no amendment. There's no debate. Okay, we have a motion and a second to call the question, and it requires a 2/3 vote for approval. All in favor of calling the question, please say aye. And for a 2/3 vote, it's good to have them stand. So have them stand, then have them be seated. All opposed to calling the question, please stand, then be seated. And if there's a 2/3 vote, your next step is to vote on what was being discussed. That's your next step. So you don't say, okay, did anybody have any, one or two more? Because we've called the question, we've got to wrap this up. That's not it. If a motion and a second was provided and you get a 2/3 vote to call the question, your very next step after that vote is to vote on what was being discussed. So, but I wanted to stress that under this point, because a chair, when they're given the responsibility to expedite business, oftentimes they will make, and I say oftentimes, they will make the mistake of saying, okay, we've talked about this enough, we're moving on. You do not have that authority. So it can only be ended the way I just described. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. Number 8, we're on page 2. Number 8. Your job as chairperson is to decide all questions of order subject to appeal, unless when in doubt, the presiding officer prefers initially to submit such a question to the assembly for decision. And so I've already pointed this out. Who has final authority in the room? It's the voting members. So let's suppose you decide, somebody makes a motion and you decide it's not in order. And you're the chairperson, you have that authority. You decide, okay, that motion is not in order. I'm not going to recognize that motion. If somebody disagrees, or if the room disagrees, then somebody can say, I appeal from the decision of the chair. And if that's seconded, that's the motion that's now immediately pending. And if by a majority vote, they decide that your ruling is not going to stand, then you've been overruled by your boss. As a chairperson, you've been overruled. Your boss is the majority vote of the membership in the room. That's why I pointed it out when we first got started, and that's why it comes up a little bit or over and over again in our discussion, because every chairperson needs to recognize that your authority is delegated. And so if you made a ruling and you're overruled by the voting membership, then your ruling is overturned, and your ruling is to be changed. So always keep that in mind. Somebody said it like this, and I don't know where I heard this. I may have heard it even in one of these NPU training sessions from a visiting somebody attending the class. When you are voted in as presiding officer, you're given a gavel, not a crown. See, and I like that. I think that's wonderful. I use that now. I don't know where I heard it. I think I heard it in the NPU training session. But when you're voted in as a presiding officer, you're given a gavel, not a crown. And all that gavel is for is just to get people's attention, and you tap it lightly. You don't smash it against the table as somebody trying to force your way through something. That's just a tap to get people's attention and let them know that the chair has, you're calling the meeting to order, or the meeting is adjourned, or you need to get people's attention to do something else. So I think that's a nice way to look at it. I think that really sums it up. Your job as the chairperson is to, and we're on number 9, your job as the chairperson is to respond to inquiries of members relating to parliamentary procedure or factual information bearing on the business of the assembly. So somebody might raise their hand and get recognition and say, Mr. Chairperson or Madam Chair, I have a question regarding procedure. Yes, what's your question? Is this particular motion in order? Then you would go ahead and answer that question. You have a parliamentarian, typically with NPUs, I believe the office of parliamentarian is pretty common. And so the parliamentarian's job is to be up on parliamentary procedure. That's why you're given that job, and that is your responsibility. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But it's your answer the question.
Mrs. Moore, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. This has to do with the chair processing or receiving a motion. So the chair has the authority to deny any motion, all motions?
So let's suppose, I'll put it this way, they do have that authority, but only as it relates to, only as is a reflection of the rules in Robert's Rules of Order. So let me put it this way. And if y'all are wanting to, we can go over some motions later on in this session if we have time. So let's suppose that you're debating on whether or not to send something to committee. Somebody made the motion, you know, this just needs to go back to committee and let them talk about it in committee. So I move that we send it back to committee. It's seconded. And now folks are talking about sending it back to committee. Then somebody makes the motion, well, I think we need to amend the main proposal. I think we need to do that. That motion is out of order because it falls under the rank of the motion to refer to committee. So while the motion to refer to committee is pending, the motion to amend the main motion is out of order. So it's the chair's job to assert that. It's the chair's job to say, sorry, Mr. So-and-so, Madam So-and-so, at this time with this motion immediately pending, the motion to amend is not in order. So that is their job. So let's suppose that somebody, let's back up now. Let's suppose that you're talking about a main motion and then somebody wants to amend it. And then the chair says, I'm sorry, that's not germane to the, because it has to relate to the main motion. And the proper term is it has to be germane to the main motion. So the chairperson says, that's not germane to the motion. And so there's some people out there that disagree. No, you should be able to make that amendment. We think you should be able to. And so the next person, so he's made a ruling. The chair has just made a ruling. That amendment is not germane to the motion. So then somebody who disagrees with the chair stands up and says, Mr. Chairman or Madam Chair, I appeal from the decision of the chair. And then it's seconded. And so depending on that, how that appeal comes out in the vote, that chair's ruling either stands or that chair's ruling is overturned. So in that sense, the chair does have the authority and the responsibility to make rulings on motions. And if they're not clear in Robert's Rules of Order, if it's a judgment call, in most cases, then perhaps the body would want to, but because the chair has to make that ruling, the chair has to make determinations like that, and the body may need to overrule. So it happened to me when I was chairing a meeting one time. It was a pretty large church. They called me and asked for help. And so I went ahead and I went over there and I was helping them out. And one gentleman, he handed me, he made an amendment to this main motion that was pending. And he came up and handed me a copy of it. And I looked at it and I was chairing the meeting. And I said, all due respect, sir, as I'm reading this, it's not germane. And it is too. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I don't see this as germane, and I have to make a ruling as chair. And I said, but I was fair to him. I said, just so you know, I don't have the final say. I said, as I'm reading this, I don't see this as germane, but somebody can appeal from the decision of the chair. And second, then there can be a vote and I can be overturned. And I explained it to him. He made that motion. Somebody seconded it. And then that was discussed because it can be discussed. And then the vote ensued and the chair's ruling stood. And so he got up and left after that. He got kind of upset, which was unfortunate, but he's got that right. But so that's how that, I don't know if that answers your question. I don't know if that helps, but it is the chair's job to make rulings on motions.
Yes, that's helpful. If we could talk about meetings and motions later, that would be helpful.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Conway, we also have a question in the chat from Mr. Martin. If someone just whines and complains, am I obliged to tell them that they can appeal my ruling?
I would. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what constitutes whining and complaining. I mean, I feel like when I'm running a meeting, I get that a lot. But if I was chairing a meeting, and I've chaired quite a few, and somebody said, well, that's not right, I would calmly try to say, it's not, you're out of order. Your comments are out of order. I would say we don't call people out of order. We call their proposal out of order. So your comments are not in order. If the member feels like the chair has made a mistaken ruling, then you do have the right to appeal from the decision of the chair. I would let them know they have that right, because what that does is, if I'm chairing the meeting, what that does is that lets them know this isn't my meeting. That lets them know that, and that's why I did it at that church. And that's the only time I've seen that motion really be used, and that's okay. It's there for a reason. But that's the reason I used it, is because I shared it and I taught these people, you can overrule me. It's not my church. It's not my meeting. I'm just the guy trying to keep things orderly and help you make your decisions. It helps people see that, I don't know how else to put it. And maybe the words are too strong, but I don't mean them to be. It helps people to see that as the guy up front, I'm not a bully. I am just trying to make sure that every decision is made fairly and properly. So I would. Any other questions? Okay. When you're chairing a meeting, especially when things get controversial, insist, and you can do it, but you can do it with a smile and you can do it respectfully. Insist that all questions and answers come through the chair. Make sure that all comments are passed through your position as chairperson. So let me do a brief sample of what that might look like. So you're debating on whether or not, I use this illustration or I use this subject a lot in the MPU training. Let's suppose somebody is a restaurant has applied for a liquor license, and you're discussing that. And somebody stands up and says, I think it'd be good for this restaurant to have a liquor license. I just think it's a good idea. And then somebody else stands up and says, well, I got just one question. There's a school right down the street, or there's a church, or there's my grandmother lives right over there. And so I don't think it's a good idea for that. What would you do? And so what tends to happen in debate, and let's have debate. Let's have strong opinions and let's have debate. That is good. That is healthy, as long as we're respectful and as long as we respect each other in the discussion. But what goes a long way toward that is that instead of me turning to my neighbor, instead of me turning to the other person that's in the meeting and saying, I don't think we need a liquor license in this neighborhood, on that block or in this street. I just don't think it's a good idea. Even though that person's sitting 2 seats down from you, look right to the chair and say, the chair, I believe that to the chair, say, I believe that it's not a good idea for a liquor license to be in, for that organization. And then you sit down and the other gentleman stands up again and says, well, I just do think it's a good idea because as long as we keep it under control and so on, but they're not talking to each other. They're all discussions going through the chairperson. And as a chairperson, you need to make sure that happens. You need to insist that all discussion goes through you. They speak to you, even if they're sitting right next to the person. They speak to you in the meeting. That way, you're a buffer. That way, they're not looking at each other and nose to nose, toe to toe, and arguing this thing out. They're looking at you, and that goes a long ways toward keeping things calm. It goes a long ways, and it's your job as chairperson to make sure that stays that way. That all discussion happens through the chair, and that goes back to one of the first things I said when we began the discussion, is that you as chairperson shouldn't allow other people at different times in the meeting to run the meeting. You must always be the central person in the room running even if there's a committee report going, that's fine, but you're on top of it. And when somebody wants to ask that committee person, that committee chair, that committee person a question, that comes through you. That comes through the chairperson. Well, but the chair, the chair of the committee is standing right there, and all they have to do is, it sounds silly, I know, but if you maintain these practices, when things get controversial and strong opinions are right on the surface and emotions are kind of tight, you'd be amazed at how far this goes to keeping friends and keeping neighbors on good terms. Are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Martin also followed with, if someone has the floor and they offer information to the body that is factually incorrect, is it wrong to correct them?
It is. So good question. It is not wrong to correct them, but what you have to do is you have to wait your turn. And then you have to make sure that you do it properly. So let's say, so we're talking about a restaurant, and we're talking about a restaurant that wants to do a liquor license. And I'm just going to use this silly example. So you are for the liquor license, and the other gentleman is against the liquor license. And the gentleman stands up and he says, that restaurant has 500 people in that room. They can seat 500 people, and you know they can only seat 180. That gentleman stands up and he says, they can seat 500 people. Can you imagine 500 drunk people coming out of that restaurant every night? So, and I'm just goofing off. I'm just trying to imitate what discussion could take place. So you're sitting there and you think, I know they can't seat 500 people. I was there just the other night and I looked at the sign, maximum capacity, 180, and I saw it. And so here he is. So he does that. And then he does his thing. You sit there and you're calm and you're nice and you put on your smile, and he says his thing, and then he sits down. Then you raise your hand and you stand up, you look at the chair. You don't say, the gentleman that, let me put it this way. You don't say, Bob over there's lying. They don't seat 500. They only seat 180. You cannot do that in a meeting. You can't accuse people of wrongdoing in a meeting. There's a proper place for that, and it's a trial. Believe it or not, Robert's Rules of Order actually has a description of how to conduct a trial for discipline. Now, the NPUs are a little different, and the disciplinary procedures are a little bit different in NPUs. We won't talk about that tonight. But the reason we're bringing it up now is because it is vital for proper discussion to take place, that he could very well be mistaken. He might be thinking about the other restaurant down the road. He might have misread the sign, or maybe his glasses are bad. Who knows what? But you don't call him a liar. You stand up and you say, the gentleman that just spoke, and you're looking at the chair, you're saying the gentleman or the lady that just spoke, they referenced that restaurant holds 500. I have to say that I believe they're mistaken. I was there the other night, And I looked up at the sign that says maximum capacity of 180. And so I just wanted to make sure that that information was out there. I'm not calling this person a liar. I don't think they're trying to pull any fast one. I'm just, and you're still looking at the chair. You just provide the information that you know is different than what was said, and that's what debate is. Yeah, give the facts as you know them, and but be careful that you do it respectfully. Other questions before we leave and go down to bylaws, et cetera, et cetera.
Amy Stout, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Hey, yes, no, Jim's question was referring to correcting somebody when he's chairing, and that is a good question. How much editorializing is the chair allowed to contribute to discussions?
That you have to be really, really careful on that. If it's just common knowledge, I mean, I wouldn't even say with common knowledge. If it has to do with the organization and there's information that would help clarify. For example, the chair could say something like, "Well, no, actually, there's only 5 people on that committee. There's not 7." Or the chair might say something like, "No, we don't have 4 committees. We have 3." Or, "No, the secretary doesn't do that. That's not how they take notes." The chair can clarify things like that. But when you start giving information about the content of the motion on the floor, you are in fact entering into debate in most every case. There might be some exceptions, but boy, you got to be really careful on that. You don't want to enter into debate, not as chair, because as soon as you do, you've lost it. You've lost you've lost the ability of the people in the room to trust that you'll be fair, if you start entering into debate. So I wouldn't do it. And Robert's Rules of Order says you can't do things like that, but I wouldn't do it.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Yes, very welcome. So then, if there's no other questions on these 11 points, at each meeting, in addition to the necessary papers proper to that business meeting, the presiding officer should have at hand a copy of the bylaws and other rules, copy of parliamentary authority, a list of all standing and special committees and their members, excuse me, then a memorandum of complete order of business, in other words, the agenda. So I'm gonna before we move on, I'm gonna speak to the idea of bylaws briefly. This isn't gonna be a bylaws class, but I want to let you know what we're talking about when we're talking about the bylaws for an NPU. The bylaws are not a guide. The bylaws are to be obeyed as they're written, with no exceptions. You can't pick and choose which bylaws and which rules in your bylaws to obey and others not to obey. And boy, chair people and parliamentarians hear this loud and clear. You must go by the rules that are on the document. You must go by the rules that are in parliamentary rule book that you're using in most cases, Robert's Rules of Order. I have heard in a number of organizations where people have said, well, it's just these bylaws are just for a guide. They're not really rules to go by. That is completely inaccurate. There are organizations that and I don't know about an NPU, but I would still want to stress the gravity of the weight of this document. This is called your bylaws. There are organizations that end up in court because they didn't follow their bylaws. And when it's demonstrated in court that they didn't follow their bylaws, they have in fact, I should put it this way, court cases that I know of, they have in fact lost the point. They've lost the case because they didn't follow their bylaws. Even though it was a a minor, even unrelated, a directly unrelated point. An organization is required, it's a legal document. An organization is required to follow its bylaws. If you don't like a rule that's in the bylaws, change it through the proper procedures. Okay, they're not just a guide. Now, I just called your bylaws a legal document. I'm not an attorney, but I am not out of line in helping you understand the gravity of the weight of that document. So it has high meaning. Doesn't carry the weight of state law, doesn't even carry the weight of city code, but it carries more weight than Robert's Rules of Order. And when we're talking about doing procedure, we are talking about obeying Robert's Rules of Order. If you have it in your mind that Robert's Rules of Order are important to have a good meeting, your bylaws are even weightier than that. And your bylaws are something you must obey. And leadership and the MPU, make sure you do that. And I know I'm sounding a little bossy right now. I'm just trying to stress, maybe in an awkward way, but I'm just trying to stress the gravity of that point. If your bylaws say something that you did it that way for a while and you've kind of gotten away from it, then change the bylaws so that they reflect the way that you're doing business. That's what they're not written in stone, they're written in clay. They're written in soft clay. You can change the bylaws as often as you want to, and that's okay. That they're supposed to reflect, your bylaws are supposed to reflect the way you do business. But once they reflect the way you do business, follow them until you change them. But until you change them, follow them. So your chairperson should have a copy of the bylaws present at the meeting. Your parliamentarian should have a copy of the bylaws present at the meeting and treat them with the weight that they indeed carry. Again, have a copy of the parliamentary authority and the standing and special committees, and then also a copy of the agenda. Of course, you'll have that. That helps you know how to go through the meeting. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to the secretary?
I don't see any hands raised, and I don't see any in the chat. So I think, oh, wait, no. Mrs. Moore, go ahead. You can unmute yourself. You're still muted, Mrs. Moore.
Okay, thank you. What is parliamentarian authority statement or document?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, Ms. Moore.
You said that the one of the documents that the chair should have is parliamentarian.
Oh, okay, sure.
Authority.
So the first one on the list is a copy of the bylaws.
Right.
The second one on the list for most MPUs would be a copy of Robert's Rules of Order. There are other rule books out there, but the most popular one and the most thorough one is called Robert's Rules of Order. So that's what that's referring to, the parliamentary authority.
Okay.
Good question. All right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So the duties of the secretary. And like I said, we are talking about the chairperson quite a bit, but it is a good time to talk about a couple of other leadership positions in the meeting as well. So the duties of the secretary, number one, to keep record of all the proceedings of the organization, usually called the minutes. Your minutes are very, very important. Your minutes are a record of what was done in the meeting. You don't want to record what was said in the meeting. That's cumbersome and it's not a good idea. There's no need for that. All you need to do, in Robert's Rules of Order, it gives guidelines on how to prepare minutes and what should be in the minutes. But go ahead and record what was done in the meeting. That's your record. That's the way you can go back and look and see, okay, this is when we decided that, or that's what we decided back then, and so on. And that's important to have those records, because I have a terrible memory and a lot of people I know do. So having it in writing and having it provided in a document that way, That's extremely helpful. Not only that, but it is an official record. If you ever have to give an answer for your decisions that you made, it's an official record of your proceedings. And for most organizations, it is. So I do work with nonprofits quite a bit, and for an incorporated nonprofit in the state of Georgia, it is required by law that they keep minutes and keep them, available for reference. Your minutes become your minutes when they're voted on. So a lot of times what will happen, and it can happen by something called unanimous consent. And if you ever watch a council meeting, for example, the president will use unanimous consent now and again. And it's a mechanism to just go ahead and approve something that everybody knows is just a formality. So with the minutes, can we have a reading of the minutes, please? Or if you handed out copies, does everybody have a copy of the minutes? Okay, if everybody has a copy of the minutes, we don't need to read them unless somebody just wants to. Okay, everybody has a copy of the minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, by unanimous consent, the minutes are adopted as written. Once that happens, now they're the official minutes. Before they're voted on, and then that's like a vote. Unanimous consent is like a vote. So let's do it another way. Let's say the chairperson is to the place where it's the approval of the minutes, and the chairperson says everybody has a copy of the minutes. And some organizations like to do it this way. Then they would say, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes, so moved. And actually, they're really supposed to say, I move that we approve minutes. And then there's a second, any discussion? All in favor say aye, aye. All opposed say no, and usually nobody does. At that point, the minutes become the official record of the meeting that was of the last meeting, okay? So the way it happens is typically is that the secretaries in the meeting take in the minutes, and then between the end of that meeting and the beginning of the next meeting, she prepares them in a legible form so that people can understand what they are. I mean, if you had to read my writing, it'd be terrible. So it's prepared, it's presented at the next meeting. The minutes for the last meeting are approved at this meeting. Now they become the official record. Until they're voted on, they're not the official record. But because they are the official record, take it seriously. Take the minutes seriously. A lot of times that's when people yawn and say, yeah, whatever, that's just the minutes. I understand that, I get that. And minutes aren't that hard. They're not that difficult to process. And they shouldn't be. But let's give it a little more weight than what we tend to give it. Because if you ever have to go back and look to see what was actually decided on, or what actions took place in your meeting, that's the official record. And that's what everybody agreed happened. And if you ever have to develop them in a formal way, you have to retrieve them and show them to somebody that really matters, somebody that's official. You want them to be right, and you want them to be a document that everybody said, yeah, this is what happened. We all agree this is what happened. So, or the majority agrees that this is what happened. So give them the weight that's due them. The minutes are important. Anybody have any questions about minutes? Okay. So I'm on number 4 on page 3, and I'm still talking about the secretary. It is the secretary's job, excuse me. It is the secretary's job to let people see the minutes if they want to see the minutes. Remember who the organization belongs to. It belongs to the voting members. The secretary's job is a delegated responsibility, and it is tedious at times. Hats off to the people that are willing to serve as secretaries. It's a good work and an honorable work, and those who do it well, it impresses me. And so, but one of the responsibilities is when somebody wants to see a copy of the minutes, say of last year's meeting, December 3, it's good for you to be able to retrieve those and let them see a copy of those. So that's part of the job of the secretary. The minutes belong to the organization, to the members of the organization, not to the secretary, not to the chairperson. They belong to the organization. Okay, before we move on, does anybody have any questions about anything you see about the secretary, work of the secretary? I just touched on 2 points. And I'm going to talk about the parliamentarian just for a little bit. All right, let's talk about the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian, even in the NPU, the parliamentarian is a consultant, sometimes a professional. I'm quoting what I've written down out of Robert's Rules of Order. They advise the president and other officers, committees, and members on matters of parliamentary procedure. The parliamentarian's role during a meeting is purely an advisory and consultative one. That's important. The parliamentarian does not have the authority to make rulings. There's one, I know I've seen it a couple, 3 times in bylaws where as they describe the bylaws, they'll say something like, the parliamentarian has the authority on parliamentary matters. Don't do that. Don't give the parliamentarian authority over procedural matters. That authority belongs to the chair. Every organization that I work for, including the Atlanta City Council, when I serve as parliamentarian, I advise on the rules. I don't make rulings. The only body that I know of, and there's probably others, the only body that I know of where the parliamentarian makes rulings is Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives at the national level. They make rulings, but the parliamentarian in an NPU, it is his or her job to know at least the basics of parliamentary procedure and to help the chair understand those things and to advise and to consult. I have provided information to chairmen and chairwomen before, and they would say, I hear you, but I'm going to go another direction. I would step back, or I would just go ahead and maintain my peace and let them run the meeting. That's the work of the parliamentarian. They are not an authority, they're a consultant. Now, the Robert's Rules of Order describes, rightfully so, I believe, Robert's Rules of Order describes that if the parliamentarian keeps getting, disagreed with and shut down, even though he knows his stuff or she knows her stuff, you might want to just let somebody else do the work. You don't want to, they're not respecting your role, and you're not seeing things eye to eye. So they need a different consultant, not you. So I just think that's important. But the role of the parliamentarian is one of a consultant, not as an authority. The very next page, on page 4, the very last paragraph. A member of an assembly who acts as its parliamentarian has the same duty as the presiding officer to maintain a position of impartiality. That is so important. As parliamentarian, you have to be the person that only cares about the rules. You don't care about the liquor license with the restaurant. You don't care about the zoning question. Everybody that watches you up there as parliamentarian, they can't believe you're on one side or the other. You've greatly hindered your ability to do your work if that's what you portray, that you're for something or you're against something. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. So we'll continue to read this paragraph. The parliamentarian is to maintain a position of impartiality and therefore does not make motions, does not participate in debate, and does not vote on any question except in the case of a ballot vote. So the parliamentarian, if the parliamentarian is a member of the organization, a member of the NPU, he or she can vote only if it's a ballot vote. But if it's a voice vote or a hand-raising vote, the parliamentarian cannot vote. And so there's one organization that I work with that I explained that to them, and they had a member who was voted in as parliamentarian, and this member voted, debated, and so on. And I pointed it out, and they changed things quickly. because a parliamentarian is not allowed to vote or debate, etc., unless they can vote. It's a ballot vote. He does not cast a deciding vote, even though if his vote would affect the result, since that would interfere with the chair's prerogative of doing so. So the chair can break a tie vote. It's not the parliamentarian's job to do that. So let me say this, and I'm still reading from Robert's Rules of Order. If a member feels that he or she cannot properly forego these rights in order to serve as parliamentarian, he or she should not accept that position. So if you don't think you can be objective as a parliamentarian, don't take the job. If you don't think you can portray a posture of I just care about the rules, I'm only going to advise about the rules, no matter how much I agree or disagree with the decision, I'm just going to do the rules. If you can't do that, according to Robert's Rules of Order, it says just don't accept the position. Sometimes it's hard for people. I know of one organization, the parliamentarian couldn't take it anymore. And he spoke up. He said, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but by golly, here's what I think. And he wasn't parliamentarian anymore after that. Unlike the presiding officer, the parliamentarian cannot temporarily relinquish his or her position in order to exercise such rights on a particular motion. So the chairperson, if they just feel like they got to speak, and this is a good place to bring this up, if a chairperson just feels like they got to speak, they can ask somebody else to chair the meeting briefly. And so a lot of times it's a vice president, if that vice president hasn't shared any opinions, or somebody else on the floor who hasn't shared any opinions, with the approval of the assembly, they can ask that person to take the chair until the point is done, until the discussion is done. The presiding officer steps out of the chair, and I would step down into the audience, depending on the arrangement in the room. But I would step down into the audience, and then I would speak on the point. I would just, you don't want to do that too often, because then they are thinking that you just can't be objective and unbiased. But if it was just something I had to speak on, bring somebody else in, sit down, and get their, be recognized by the moderator, say my piece, enter into debate. And then once that point is voted on, then I would come back up and I would get my position back in the chair. So that's an option for a chairperson, but you can't debate. If you want to keep an orderly meeting, you want to make sure that everybody respects you and will listen to your guidance as chairperson. You can't let on like you have a position in the matter. And when you step out and you take a position on the matter, you can't get back in that chair until that point is voted on. That's how important it is. That's how important it is. So as a parliamentarian and as a chairperson, as I've chaired meetings, I do have opinions. But nobody knows them. I have views that I might share in a meeting. And I mean, I've said in meetings before, I thought, oh man, they're missing it. Oh man, they if they just knew what I know, but I bit my tongue and I did my job, because you're like an umpire or a referee. Can you imagine watching your favorite baseball game and the umpire, lets it known in the microphone, well, I'm actually rooting for this other team. I want the Cubs to win over the Braves. I kind of like them better, but I'm going to do my job and I'm going to make sure that we do a fair game here. Nobody would believe him. Nobody would listen to him. They'd get him out of there. So you can't let on. Even if we all have opinions, even parliamentarians and chairpersons. But it's not your job to have an opinion in those positions. It really isn't. It is your job to be the right kind of referee, so that the majority of the voting members can make the right kind of decision for that body. That's your place. So, pardon me.
So well, I think you might have just answered one of the questions we had. What process does the parliamentarian use to advise? I think he kind of answered that a little bit.
What was the question again?
What process does the parliamentarian use to advise? Oh,
okay. Well, I might have answered it indirectly. As a parliamentarian, the job is described as being very in the background, you are subtle. And in some cases, it's not easy to be. When I'm on the dais at the Atlanta City Hall, if you ever watch, I have to walk right up to the president and whisper in his ear and speak to him. So that's not subtle. Everybody knows what's happening. So, but in other organizations, I just whisper to the chair. And so because the chairperson has to be the front and center person who is running the meeting. So when I see something that's getting ready to happen, I gently tap the chairperson or get their attention somehow, and they'll look to me, and I'll tell them what my ideas are, what my thoughts are. Sometimes they'll turn to me and ask me a question, and then I'll just answer the question. But it is to be very downplayed. The role of the parliamentarian, if nobody knows you're there, you're doing an excellent job. But like I said, in some settings, in other organizations that I've worked with, I've had to stand right next to the chairperson and talk to them while they're and I'm right there. I mean, everybody's looking right at me, but there's no choice just because of the way it's set up. But you try to be as discreet as you can. Excuse me.
I have another question. If the chair and the parliamentarian don't vote, do they count toward the quorum?
If they're members, yes.
Okay. And another question, and I think we missed it. Sagira, what part were you asking him to say again? On right now. The parliamentarian.
I think I was just a little flabbergasted. I wasn't for sure if I heard him correctly when he said the parliamentarian doesn't vote, doesn't debate, doesn't discuss. So I wanted clarity on that. And then also wanting to know, can they ask clarifying questions?
So the parliamentarian is an advisor to the rules. If the parliamentarian entered into debate, it's over. It's like the umpire saying what team he's rooting for. If the parliamentarian raises his hand and votes, it's over for him or her as far as being able to be trusted as an objective referee, if you will, or umpire for the rules. Because once they express an opinion, then, well, okay, wait a minute, they're on the other side. That's why they ruled the way they did, or that's why they recommended the way they did. So let me walk through a quick scenario. Let's suppose I'm serving as a parliamentarian, and I'm able to let some folks know in the room how I feel, and I do it discreetly, and maybe I whisper, hey, I think we need to vote this in, and a couple of people I know, some of my friends, yeah, we need to vote this in. Kind of word gets out. They're saying, okay, good. The parliamentarian agrees with what's right here. And so then I make a couple comments to the chair, and then the chair's running the meeting and so on. And a couple comments again, he's running the meeting. The vote goes the way that I, as a parliamentarian, think it ought to. And my friends out there, it went the way they think it ought to. And really, at first blush, it seemed like there's no harm in that. And even on the way out of the meeting, where I'm going out the parking lot and I'm getting slapped on the back, man, good job, man. That was important. We really need to get that passed. And you did a nice job. You really helped us here tonight. Thank you. And I'm feeling good. They're feeling good. The vote went the way we thought it should. Well, so next meeting. Now I'm the parliamentarian, and I'm giving recommendations to the chair. And now folks are saying, oh, he's against us. He's against us. He's working against us. He's trying to get his way again. Well, shoot, this ain't good. That parliamentarian, now I'm nobody's friend. Now, when I'm giving recommendations to the chair, and they're kind of causing the majority in the room, if you will, to kind of tighten things up and be more orderly in their procedure. Now they're feeling like they're getting pushed back. Because that's what happens sometimes if they don't understand that procedure is just about procedure. It's not about pushback. But now they're interpreting it as pushback because I am providing recommendations that is causing the majority to feel that way. Now I'm the bad guy. So I was the good guy in the last meeting. I'm the bad guy in this meeting. And I've lost my ability to recommend now. I've lost my ability to provide true objective consultation because nobody in the room trusts me now. Maybe they think I'm honest, maybe they think I'm a good guy, but they don't think that I would be able to be fair as a parliamentarian. So that's why that job is so important, that you don't debate, you don't vote unless it's a ballot vote. Because if you're a member, you can vote it by ballot because nobody knows how you voted. And as far as they know, you're just objective and you've got the right to vote by ballot. And we don't know how he or she voted. Maybe they abstained. But otherwise, I've lost my ability to have them be confident that I'm just about the rules of the game. Same thing with the chairperson. If people can tell that the chair is hoping for things to go one way or the other, then he diminishes his ability to run the meeting in an objective way and have people listen to him or her so that he or she can run things in an objective way. You sacrifice your privileges of debate and motions when you take those positions.
Gary, did you have a follow-up to that?
I did. So this is very specific. Our parliamentarian is also the president of a neighborhood association. And so we call upon him or ask him for feedback when it comes to an application. How did the neighborhood vote? What was the feedback? Things of that nature. So I guess this is part of the reason why it's concerning to me, because this is not, a high-level governmental agency meeting. This is a neighborhood. This is a group of neighborhood associations of volunteers, and so you don't have as large of a pool of people to be able to be in certain positions, and so sometimes people are pulling double duties. Yeah. So how can that be addressed, or how can we still make sure that we get the proper feedback from the neighborhood association and keep the parliamentarian in that position of trust or credibility?
Sure. Is the parliamentarian, help me out a little bit, is the parliamentarian, when you're asking those questions about how the organization voted and so on, are they just black and white objective questions, or do they require the parliamentarian to give opinion?
Both. It depends on the situation. It depends on the applicant and the situation.
If the parliamentarian has to give opinion, then that's a bad arrangement. And I can say that with confidence. And I understand that you have a small pool to draw from, but I would make that a priority to try to figure out how to maintain the position of parliamentarian. And it might take a little bit of finagling and some time. And I'm sure the parliamentarian that you have is a great person and does their best to be objective and respectful. But I wouldn't want to do that work. I wouldn't want to be a parliamentarian and have to give opinions on issues. I would do one or the other, because again, hate to overuse an analogy, but you've got a referee there that is having to give opinions on what team he favors or doesn't.
We also have another question from Mr. Moulton. If the parliamentarian is a part of the membership and can therefore vote, but cannot throw a deciding vote, and it is tied and the final vote is the parliamentarian, can they break the tie? Same for the chairman.
Well, it'll never come down to the parliamentarian breaking the tie vote as such, as I think through the scenarios, because the parliamentarian and the chair can both vote in the ballot vote. So when it comes to the idea of the chair breaking the tie vote, in that scenario, the parliamentarian isn't voting, because the only time a chairperson, other than the chair breaking the tie vote, the only time a chairperson and a parliamentarian can really vote is a ballot vote. And it's either going to be a tie or not. So So in other words, with a ballot vote, it's not going to be such that, okay, well, there's a tie, so chairperson, how do you vote? Well, they will have voted, either that or abstained, but it doesn't come into play for a ballot vote, breaking the tie. So it only comes into play, the chair breaking the tie vote only comes into play when it's a voice vote, a roll call vote, maybe not even a roll call vote, I'd have to look at that again, but a voice vote or a raising of the hands. And so if it's a voice vote or a raising of the hands, then the parliamentarian isn't involved. And so what Robert's Rules of Order is saying is, so let's say you've got a tie vote, raising of the hand, you got a tie vote, and you got the parliamentarian and the chairperson sitting up there. Well, who's going to break the tie? It's not going to be the parliamentarian. It's going to be the presiding officer. The parliamentarian will just never vote in that case. So let me back up, and I had to think for a second. In a roll call vote, yes, the chairperson can break a tie. But in a ballot vote, it wouldn't apply. Most cases. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Did they answer the question? Yes. Okay. Good. Good. Thank you. Any other questions?
None that I can see, Mr. Conway. I think you can keep going.
Okay. So where we are now is we're going to get into basic parliamentary procedure. So before we get in there, I'll give one more call out to see if you have any questions before we get into basic parliamentary procedure. Sagara Jones has a hand raised, I think.
Sagara, go ahead.
Thanks. So I know not every MPU has a sergeant at arms, but can you talk a little bit about their role? Because I know sometimes people get frustrated when a sergeant at arms may do, I guess, some of the duties of the parliamentarian. So how can a sergeant at arms keep the meeting in order while also being in order, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I have to admit, the thoughts of a sergeant at arms serving as parliamentarian, I'd have to ponder that a little bit. Typically the sergeant at arms, so I'll give you a little bit of history and describe where that title, where that office came from.
Can I clarify my question? I wasn't saying that they were both roles. There is a parliamentarian and there is a sergeant at arms, but sometimes I've seen meetings where neither the chair nor the parliamentarian are implementing Robert's Rules of Order. And so as the sergeant at arms is trying to keep order, people are like, that's what the parliamentarian is supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. So wanting to know like a clear distinction between those roles and how that can be kept in order.
Sure. So a sergeant at arms, and thank you for the clarification, that does help. The sergeant at arms, actually, the title has to do with an individual who can make arrests. And I'm just giving you background. I'm just letting you know where the title came from and what the office originated as. I don't know if you know this, but in Congress, they are required to attend. And if they don't attend, they can be brought in by arrest. And that's what the sergeant at arms would do. That was his job. He would go arrest a senator or a representative and bring them back into the chamber, and they'd have to do their job. It was a required place to be. So a sergeant at arms for typical nonprofit organizations or for a private organization, and this is going to sound downplayed, but it is a position where a lot of times they'll watch the door, they'll greet people and make sure that everybody's, who are members, who are visitors. You know, you got the right tag and things like that. Make sure the chairs are proper, things are comfortable, and so on. And in some organizations, the sergeant at arms will be the gentleman who actually does step over to somebody if the chair says, you know, we're going to have to ask you to leave the meeting because, you know, you're not a member and you're not conducting yourself well, and you know, I won't allow that anymore. In some organizations, the sergeant at arms will have that training where he'll know how to escort someone out. But that's the extent of it. The sergeant at arms really, it isn't the sergeant at arms' job to keep order in a meeting, if you will. That's the chairperson's job. And then the parliamentarian's job is to advise on procedure, advise the chairperson on procedure. For a virtual meeting, and I don't know how this meeting is taking place that you're describing, but for a virtual meeting, I'm not sure what role a sergeant at arms would play. Perhaps they have that office and maybe there's something they can do. Maybe they're the ones that can, if they know technology, maybe they can, you know, run the technology while people while the chair's running the meeting. I know that's a role. But no, the sergeant at arms does not have the place to give parliamentary advice unless called upon, or unless, you know, the chair says, does anybody, you know, parliamentarian doesn't know, I don't know, does anybody know what the proper approach is here? Then maybe the parliamentarian just, yeah, I happen to know that, speak up. But as an official position, that's not their place to keep order or to advise the chair on procedure. I don't know if that helps.
It did. Thank you for the clarity.
Yes.
I do have a question in the chat from Mr. Ben Howard. When and how does a request/motion for a roll call vote be put to the membership?
When and how? Okay. There's rarely a need for a roll call vote in most organizations. Let me give this backdrop on what a roll call vote is. A roll call vote primarily has its application for individuals who represent constituents. That's typically what a roll call vote is. It's just the opposite of a ballot vote. The ballot vote is for privacy. The roll call vote is for transparency. Everybody on the planet gets to know how you voted, and that's what it's there for. And the reason it's designed that way is so that the people that put you into office, they are backing you. They voted you in. They want to see exactly how you vote on particular issues. That's what the purpose of a roll call vote is. In most every other private organization, there's really no need for it. You know, unless for some reason, because of the issue, you just really want to make sure that everybody knows everybody voted. It takes a motion and a second and then a vote to put that mechanism into place, just like a ballot vote. If it's done when no motion is pending, then you can debate it and decide whether or not that you'll function by way of a roll call vote. If there is a motion pending and you want to put in a roll call vote, it's a motion and a second, and it's not debatable, then you would just vote and decide whether or not it's going to be a roll call vote.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think as far as the chat, those were the only questions, and there aren't any hands raised.
Okay. All right. And by the way, thank you for the questions. One of the things I enjoy about these training sessions is that, and I mean this sincerely, y'all always have really good questions. You really do. I really look forward to these. And so thank you for your attendance, and thank you for your insightful questions. So what we'll do next is if there are no more questions about leadership, and I let Ms. Terry know that what we would do is we would talk about leadership. The first time I gave this presentation, we never even got to the second part, and it had to do with general parliamentary procedure because there were so many questions on leadership. And so, but tonight we have a little bit more time, So if you're interested, we'll go ahead and start talking a little bit about basic parliamentary procedure. Is that all right, Ms. Terry? That sound good?
Listen, we have time. Go for it.
Okay. So you have a chart in front of you, and in that chart, at the top of it, pardon my hoarseness, at the top of it, it says main, subsidiary, and privileged motions. And
Mr. Conway, what page are you on? I just put the attachment in the chat for anyone who may have jumped on a little later that we're working from. But what page are you on so they are aware?
Oh, I'm on page 5.
Page 5. Okay.
I don't know if they're numbered. I hope they're numbered on your worksheet. I have the numbers penciled in on mine. I updated the worksheet a little bit before I sent it to you. I can't remember if I put page numbers or not. So, but you can't miss it. It's a chart, and it says main, subsidiary, and privileged motions right at the top. And then you're going to see words under that. It says interrupt, second, debate, amend, vote, and reconsider. So those words that I just read, they're titles for those columns. The first column is whether or not you can.
So I didn't need it again.
Okay.
If you could please mute your I think you can continue, Mr. Conway.
That's okay. And I don't mind. I mean, I'm surprised there's not that it's going as smoothly as it is. It really is. Because electronic meetings, I mean, they are what they are. So the first column is it says interrupt at the top, and if you follow it all the way down, it'll show you the motions that you can interrupt on, and there's only 2 of them. So the second column is a second, and this is going to show you the motions that require a second, and all but 2 motions require a second. And then debate is going to show you, when you follow this all the way down, it's going to show you what motions are debatable. And you get all the way, if you start at the top, you get all the way down, you don't get to a debatable motion until it's postponed definitely, and then commit or refer and so on. So that's how this chart reads. And the motions, if you look at the very bottom, you're going to see a main motion at the very bottom. So when you're looking at the main motion, you look at those letters across the top of the word main motion. And can you interrupt to make a main motion? No, because the little square there under the column interrupt is blank. So that means you can't interrupt somebody speaking to make your main motion. Okay. Does it require a second? It does. Is it debatable? Yes. Is it amendable? Yes. It requires a majority vote, and it can be reconsidered. So that's the basics of how you read this chart. And this is similar. This is my design, and not that it's special. It's just what makes sense in my mind. There are other charts you can purchase that give the same information, but this is the one that I did, and this is the one that I use. So don't ever interrupt each other. Don't, unless it's there's only a couple of motions that you can interrupt someone on, and raise a question of privilege or call for orders of the day. And we'll get to those later if we can. But everything else, you wait until somebody sits down, or you wait till they're done speaking, and then you let the chair know by raising your hand or by standing, whatever protocol is in your NPU. You let them know, I want to speak next.